The day started like any other, the aroma of stale coffee mingling with the faint but ever-present scent of oil and gasoline that clung to every surface in my shop. I was just finishing up a rather fiddly sensor replacement on an older German sedan, the kind of job that requires more patience than brute strength, when I heard the familiar rumble of a tow truck pulling into the lot. Usually that means a quick diagnostic, maybe a new battery or an alternator. Today, though, the air felt different. There was a weight to the silence after the truck's engine cut, a palpable tension as the driver lowered a truly magnificent machine onto my concrete pad. It was a late-model performance coupe, sleek and obsidian black, a car that usually announced its presence with a throaty roar. But this one was silent, slumped, its perfect lines marred by a thick layer of dust and a general air of dejection. The owner, a man named Marcus, stepped out of the tow truck's cab, his shoulders hunched, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond simple frustration. I'd known Marcus for years. He trusted me with his daily driver. But this was his pride and joy, a car he'd poured his soul and a significant chunk of his savings into. He walked towards me, his gaze fixed on the lifeless vehicle, and I could tell immediately this wasn't just a dead battery. He started talking before he even reached me, his voice low and strained. He told me he'd taken it to another shop, a place across town run by a fellow named Victor Stone. Victor, or Stone as he preferred to be called, had a reputation. He was known for being flashy, for his aggressive marketing, and for his rather inflated prices. I'd always kept a professional distance, preferring my honest, no-nonsense approach to his theatrical flair. Marcus explained that Stone had kept the car for weeks, promising a full diagnosis, a complete restoration of its former glory. But then the calls started getting vague, the updates less frequent. Finally, after almost a month, Stone had called Marcus and delivered the verdict. The car was beyond repair, a complete write-off. He'd even suggested Marcus scrap it, saying the engine was seized, the electronics fried, and the chassis potentially compromised. Marcus was devastated. He'd paid Stone a hefty diagnostic fee, only to be told his dream car was a pile of junk. I walked over to the car, my eyes scanning its exterior. No obvious signs of a crash, no major body damage. It looked like it had simply given up the ghost. But the story Marcus was telling, the way his voice trembled with a mixture of anger and despair, it didn't sit right with me. Stone declaring a modern performance car unfixable? That was a bold claim, especially for a shop that prided itself on handling high-end vehicles. My gut, that old familiar feeling that had saved me from countless headaches over the years, told me there was more to this story. Much more. I put a hand on Marcus's shoulder, a silent reassurance. I told him to leave it with me. I promised him I'd give it a thorough, unbiased look. I explained that I couldn't promise miracles, but I could promise honesty and a complete rundown of exactly what was going on under that glossy black paint. Marcus nodded, a flicker of hope returning to his eyes. He handed me the keys, along with a thick folder of invoices and diagnostic reports from Stone's shop. I told him I'd be in touch, and he left, the tow truck rumbling away, leaving me alone with the silent, brooding machine. As I watched him go, a quiet determination settled over me. This wasn't just another repair job anymore. This was personal. Stone's shop had always been a thorn in my side, siphoning off customers with flashy promises and then, apparently, delivering catastrophic news. Declaring a car like this a write-off without a definitive, transparent explanation felt less like a diagnosis and more like something else. I wasn't sure what yet, but I intended to find out. My first step, as always, was a full visual inspection. I grabbed a powerful LED work light and started circling the car, slowly, methodically. The paint, despite the dust, was still immaculate. The tires were good, the wheels unscuffed. I popped the hood. The engine bay was surprisingly clean, almost too clean for a car that was supposedly dead. No obvious leaks, no burnt smells, nothing immediately screaming catastrophic failure. I checked the battery terminals. Secure. No corrosion. I tried the door. It unlocked with a soft click, the interior lights illuminating, so some electrical power was definitely present. I slid into the driver's seat. The leather still smelled new, the dashboard a symphony of digital displays. I pressed the start button. Nothing. Not even a click from the starter solenoid. No dash lights. Just a blank, dark screen where the infotainment system should be. It was utterly dead. I tried the headlights. No wipers, no horn, nothing. It was as if the car had simply been unplugged from its own life force. That was odd. If the battery was completely flat, I'd expect at least a flicker, a weak attempt. But this was total silence. I pulled out my multimeter and checked the battery voltage directly at the terminals. 12.6 volts, a perfectly healthy battery. Okay, that immediately contradicted the idea of a dead battery being the sole culprit. Something was preventing that power from reaching the rest of the car. This was a good sign, a sign that the car wasn't completely electrically fried, as Stone had implied. It meant the problem was likely upstream, before the main distribution. Next, I hooked up my advanced diagnostic scanner. Even if the car wouldn't start, I often found I could still establish communication with various control modules, especially if there was the pier, casting a warm glow on the asphalt. The subtle flicker hadn't reappeared, adding to its elusive nature. It was like trying to catch smoke. But the seed was planted. I knew that the next time I was in the garage, I would have a new mission. I would start by meticulously rechecking all the power and ground connections to the instrument cluster, perhaps even pulling the cluster itself to inspect its internal components. It might be a tiny, almost insignificant fault, but it was Touplan's car, and it deserved nothing less than absolute perfection. The drive back was still exhilarating, despite the added layer of analytical thought. The M3 remained a magnificent machine, responsive, powerful, and utterly engaging. Its engine continued to sing its high-revving song, each gear changed from the dual-clutch transmission, a lightning-fast, seamless transition. The steering remained direct, the suspension firm yet sophisticated. It was a car that encouraged confidence, even when faced with the ghost of a potential fault. In fact, that ghost only deepened the bond, adding another layer to the ongoing story of this remarkable vehicle and its dedicated owner. The journey was far from over. It had merely taken an unexpected turn down a path of further discovery, and I, for one, was eager to see where it would lead. The garage awaited, and with it, the next chapter in our shared adventure. The car was alive, and it was still speaking to me, in whispers, and I was listening. Always listening. The garage door rumbled open, a familiar mechanical groan that always signaled the transition from the world outside to my sanctuary. The M3 slid in, its powerful engine settling into a contented idle before I cut the ignition. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. I stood for a moment, hands on the hips, gazing at its sleek form under the fluorescent lights. It looked perfect, utterly pristine, yet I knew a secret resided within its mechanical heart, a whisper I needed to understand. This was more than just a car to me. It was an extension of myself, a meticulously crafted piece of engineering that I had come to know intimately. Every bolt, every seam, every curve held a story, and now a new chapter was beginning, one of diagnosis and perhaps renewal. My tools, neatly arrayed on a workbench, seemed to gleam in anticipation. The scent of oil and gasoline, mixed with the faint sweetness of coolant, was a perfume I found deeply comforting. The ritual began. I changed into my work clothes, a worn pair of overalls that had seen many battles under the hood. My mind was already sifting through possibilities, recalling the precise sensation on the road. It wasn't a clunk, not a grinding noise, nothing overtly alarming. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration, a textural shift in the car's feedback, like a faint tremor that pulsed through the chassis at certain speeds, under specific loads. It was the kind of thing only an owner deeply attuned to their machine would ever notice, a whisper in the symphony of its operation. I started with the simplest checks. Tires first. I ran my hands over the tread, feeling for uneven wear, bulges, or punctures. All 4 Michelins looked perfect, their aggressive tread still deep and even. I checked the pressures, ensuring they were spot on. Next, a visual inspection of the suspension components visible without lifting the car. The control arms, sway bar links, and shock towers looked solid. No obvious leaks from the dampers, no cracked bushings or bent components. Everything appeared tight and purposeful, as it should, but the whisper persisted in my memory, a persistent itch I needed to scratch. This required a deeper dive. I retrieved the low-profile jack in the heavy-duty jack stance. The process of lifting the M3 was a careful dance, positioning the jack pads precisely, slowly raising each corner, then sliding the stand securely into place. The car ascended, its wheels hanging freely, exposing the intricate underbelly that was usually hidden from view. Underneath, the M3 transformed. It became a complex sculpture of metal, hoses, wires, and precision-machined components. I grabbed a powerful LED work light and began my methodical inspection. Starting from the front, I examined the steering rack, feeling for any play in the tie rods, checking the boots for tears. The front suspension arms, the massive brake calipers, the wheel bearings. I wiggled, twisted, and pushed, searching for any hint of looseness, any telltale sign of wear. The front end seemed impeccable, a testament to robust German engineering and my diligent maintenance. Moving rearward, my focus shifted to the drivetrain. The driveshaft, a thick, carbon fiber tube, looked pristine. I checked the universal joints and the flex disc, or guibo, for cracks or excessive play. These components are crucial for smooth power delivery and can often be a source of subtle vibrations if worn. Again, everything appeared solid. Then came the rear suspension and subframe. This was often where the more elusive issues hid. BMW M cars, particularly the E9X generation, are known for their robust but occasionally temperamental rear-end components. I meticulously inspected every bushing, the large, often problematic subframe bushings that attach the entire rear suspension assembly to the chassis, the differential bushings, the control arm bushings. I used a pry bar gently, levering against various points to induce movement, feeling for any give that should NT be there. I was looking for even the slightest tear in the rubber, the smallest amount of slop. The hours melted away. My back began to ache, my hands grew grimy, but my concentration remained absolute. Each component examined, each bolt checked for proper torque, was a step closer to understanding the car's language. I was listening with my eyes and my hands now, trying to translate the mechanical into something I could comprehend and rectify. Frustration began to creep in. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. How could a car, so seemingly flawless, be harboring this subtle inconsistency? Was I imagining it? Was it merely a trick of the road, a momentary lapse in my own perception? No, I knew this car too well. The whisper was real. It was faint, but it was there, a discordant note in an otherwise perfect symphony. I took a break, stepping away from the car, wiping my hands on a rag. I walked around the garage, my eyes scanning the shelves of spare parts, the posters of legendary race cars. I needed to reset, to look with fresh eyes. Sometimes the answer lies not in what you see, but in what you expect to see. I had been looking for a catastrophic failure, an obvious crack, a gaping tear. But the whisper was subtle, implying something equally subtle in its cause. I returned to the rear end, this time with a more focused approach. Instead of looking for major damage, I began to look for the asterisk absence of perfection. I focused on the differential, the heart of the rear drive system. Its mounts, typically 3 large bushings, are critical for keeping the differential precisely positioned and absorbing drivetrain vibrations. I applied pressure to the differential housing, attempting to rock it slightly. The 2 front bushings seemed robust, but as I moved to the single larger rear differential bushing, I felt it. A very, very slight give. Not a tear, not a complete failure, but a minuscule amount of movement that was just beyond what I considered ideal for a car of this caliber, especially one that occasionally saw track duty. It was almost imperceptible, a mere fraction of a millimeter of play, but it was enough. Enough to allow the differential to shift, ever so slightly, under load changes, sending that faint tremor, that whisper, through the chassis. It was the kind of wear that wouldn't throw a code, wouldn't cause a loud noise, but would absolutely be felt by a driver intimately connected to their machine. A sigh of relief escaped me, mixed with a surge of satisfaction. I had found it. The ghost had a name. It wasn't a major fault, but it was a deviation from absolute perfection, and that was enough. The car had spoken, and I had finally understood. Now, the planning phase began. I pulled out my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Online forums, parts diagrams, technical service bulletins. I devoured information. The rear differential bushing on the E9XM3 was a known wear item, particularly for those who drove their cars hard. Many owners opted for upgraded, stiffer polyurethane bushings to eliminate any flex and improve throttle response. This seemed like the logical path. Why simply replace with OEM when an improvement was available? I spent the next hour researching different brands, reading reviews, comparing durometer ratings. I wanted something that would eliminate the play without introducing excessive NVH, noise, vibration, and harshness, a delicate balance. I settled on a reputable brand known for producing high-quality, street-friendly performance bushings. I found the part number, checked stock, and placed the order. The waiting game had begun. The next few days were filled with a restless anticipation. The M3 remained on its jack stands, a silent patient, awaiting surgery. I used the time to clean the underside of the car, detailing the suspension components, ensuring every nut and bolt was free of grime. I organized my tools, preparing for the task ahead. Replacing a differential bushing was not a simple bolt-on affair. It often required specialized tools, particularly a bushing press, to extract the old one and install the new. I ordered a universal bushing removal and installation kit online, another investment in my ongoing commitment to this car. When the parts finally arrived, the garage felt charged with a new energy. The heavy box containing the bushing press kit and the smaller package holding the new polyurethane bushing felt like treasure. The bushing itself was a vibrant red, a stark contrast to the dull black rubber it would replace, a visual promise of enhanced performance and precision. I laid out all the tools, socket sets, wrenches, pry bars, torque wrench, breaker bar, and the newly acquired bushing press. I reread the installation guides, watched a few YouTube videos of other enthusiasts tackling the same job. Preparation was key. I wanted no surprises, no missed steps. The actual repair began with disconnecting the drive shaft from the differential input flange and removing the exhaust system to gain better access. This was a familiar process, having done exhaust work before. The bolts were stubborn, but a liberal application of penetrating oil and the leverage of the breaker bar eventually persuaded them. The exhaust system was carefully lowered and set aside. Next came the differential itself. It was a heavy, compact unit filled with viscous gear oil. The bolts holding it to the subframe were substantial, requiring significant force to loosen. With the differential partially supported by a transmission jack, I carefully removed the two front-mounting bolts, leaving only the problematic rear one in place. The differential sagged slightly, revealing the full extent of the worn rear bushing. It was indeed compressed and slightly cracked, confirming my initial diagnosis. The real challenge began with the extraction of the old bushing. This was where the specialized press came into play. I assembled the press around the bushing, carefully aligning the plates and threaded rod. With each turn of the wrench, the old rubber bushing groaned and slowly, reluctantly, began to yield. It was a slow, methodical process, requiring patience and brute force. The rubber was incredibly stiff, bonded firmly to the metal housing. Sweat beaded on my forehead, but I pushed on, visualizing the improved feel of the car once this was done. Finally, with a loud pop, the old bushing broke free and dropped out. I held it in my hand, a small, unassuming piece of rubber, yet responsible for that elusive whisper. The housing was cleaned, meticulously, removing all traces of the old rubber and any corrosion. Then came the installation of the new polyurethane bushing. This was often easier than removal, but still required care. I applied a thin layer of the supplied grease to the bushing in the housing, aiding its passage. The press was reassembled, and with steady, even pressure, the bright red bushing was slowly drawn into its new home. It slid in smoothly, seating perfectly flush, a testament to precise manufacturing and careful installation. There was no play, no give whatsoever. It felt solid, utterly resolute. Reassembly was the reverse of removal. The differential was carefully lifted back into position with the transmission jack, aligning the mounting holes. The large bolts were reinserted and torqued down to factory specifications, using my trusty torque wrench. Each click of the wrench was a satisfying affirmation of precision. The driveshaft was reconnected, the exhaust system reinstalled, and every connection double-checked. I even took the opportunity to inspect the differential fluid, deciding it was still in good condition. Finally, after what felt like an entire day of labor, the M3 was ready to be lowered. I removed the jack stands, slowly letting the car settle back onto its wheels. I stood back, admiring my handiwork. It looked exactly the same, but I knew, deep down, it was fundamentally different. The whisper was gone, replaced by a promise of renewed solidity. The moment of truth arrived with the test drive. I started the engine, its familiar rumble, a comforting sound. I backed out of the garage, the steering feeling immediately tighter, more direct, even at low speeds. The first few miles were tentative, a gentle probing of the car's responses. I drove over familiar bumps, through corners I knew intimately. I accelerated gently, then more assertively, feeling for that subtle vibration, that textural shift that had plagued me. It was gone. The car felt utterly planted, solid and cohesive. The power delivery felt more direct, the rear end responding with an immediate, unwavering precision that had been subtly absent before. There was a new crispness to the throttle response, a sense of absolute connection between my foot and the rear wheels. The slight, almost imperceptible squirm under hard acceleration was gone. The transient movements in corners, that hint of looseness, had vanished. The M3 was back to its absolute best, perhaps even better than before, thanks to the upgraded bushing. A broad smile spread across my face. This was it. This was the M3 I knew and loved, refined, perfected. The whisper was silenced, not by ignoring it, but by listening intently, diagnosing carefully, and acting decisively. The journey had indeed taken an unexpected turn, leading to further discovery, and that discovery had only deepened my appreciation for this magnificent machine. As I drove, the engine singing its high-revving song, the dual-clutch transmission executing flawless shifts, I felt a renewed sense of connection. The bond between owner and machine was not just about the thrill of speed or the beauty of design. It was about understanding, about maintenance, about the shared effort to maintain perfection. This car was alive, truly alive, and it had spoken to me, not in whispers anymore, but in a clear, resonant voice of absolute mechanical harmony. And I was listening. Always listening. The road ahead stretched out, inviting and open, and the M3 and I, now even more intimately connected, were ready for whatever adventures it held. The garage awaited our return, but for now the journey continued, flawless and exhilarating. The asphalt ribbon unwound before us, a tapestry of gentle curves and long, sweeping straights. Each corner was an invitation, each acceleration a celebration of mechanical precision. The steering wheel, now a familiar extension of my will, communicated every nuance of the road surface, every subtle shift in grip, with an almost telepathic clarity. The chassis, taut and responsive, danced through the turns, its balance a testament to meticulous engineering. I felt the G-forces press me gently into the bolstered seat, a reassuring embrace that affirmed the car's unwavering stability. The exhaust note, A rich, metallic symphony reverberated off the surrounding landscape, a visceral declaration of power and purpose. This was not merely driving, it was an immersion. My senses were fully engaged, attuned to the subtle vibrations through the pedals, the precise weighting of the brake pedal, the instantaneous response of the throttle. The recent diagnostic journey, the precise intervention, had not just restored the car, it had some residual power. I plugged it into the OBD2 port, waited for it to initialize, and then tried to connect. The scanner blinked, attempted to establish a link, and then displayed a message. No communication with vehicle ECU. That was a big red flag. No communication usually means one of two things. Either the ECU itself is dead, or there's a complete power loss to the ECU, or the communication bus is completely down. Stone had mentioned fried electronics. This certainly pointed in that direction, but I wasn't ready to jump to conclusions yet. I spent the rest of the afternoon meticulously going through the fuses. Every single one. Under the hood, in the passenger footwell, in the trunk. I used my circuit tester, checking for continuity, making sure each fuse was intact. It was a tedious process, but absolutely essential. A single blown fuse could disable an entire system, or even multiple systems if it was a main power fuse. To my surprise, every single fuse I tested was perfectly fine. Not a single one was blown. This deepened the mystery. If power wasn't getting to the ECU, and all the fuses were good, where was the break in the circuit? I decided to take a break, let the information percolate. I went back to Marcus's folder of documents from Stone's shop. I flipped through the invoices, noting the exorbitant hourly rates and the vague descriptions of work performed. Then, I came to the diagnostic report. It was a 2-page printout, riddled with technical jargon, but the key takeaway was clear. Multiple internal short circuits detected throughout the vehicle's CAN bus system. Engine control unit unresponsive. Transmission control module unresponsive. Body control module unresponsive. Estimated repair cost exceeds vehicle value. Recommend salvage. CAN bus system. That was the central nervous system of modern cars. A network that allowed all the different electronic modules to communicate. If the CAN bus was truly shorted out, it would certainly explain the lack of communication and the car's complete lifelessness. But a short circuit across the entire CAN bus is incredibly rare without some significant event, like a flood or a major electrical surge. And if it was shorted, I would expect blown fuses or visible signs of burnt wiring. None of that was present. My suspicions solidified. This wasn't just an unfixable car. This was either a case of extreme incompetence or something far more deliberate. Stone had a history of trying to buy up high-end cars that he declared scrap, only to quietly repair them and flip them for a profit. Was this another one of those schemes? Or was it something else, something directed at me, a way to discredit my honest reputation by presenting me with an impossible task that he'd already declared impossible? The thought rankled. I decided to start tracing the main power supply to the ECU. This would involve digging a bit deeper, removing some trim panels to access wiring harnesses. I grabbed my wiring diagrams for this specific model, a thick tome of electrical spaghetti that only a true masochist or a dedicated mechanic could love. I located the main power feeds to the ECU, identified the specific wires, and started checking for voltage at various points. The first point was the main power relay. With the ignition on, I should see 12 volts going in and 12 volts coming out to the ECU. I turned the ignition to the accessory position. Still no dash lights, but the car's internal systems should be awake enough to energize the relay. I checked the input side of the relay. 12.6 volts. Good. Then I checked the output side. Nothing. 0 volts. Aha! This was a significant discovery. The relay wasn't switching. It was receiving power, but not sending it on. That could mean a faulty relay, or it could mean the relay wasn't being told to switch on by the car's central computer, perhaps due to a missing ground signal. I pulled the relay out, a small black cube, and tested it independently with a bench power supply. Click. It worked perfectly, so the relay itself wasn't the problem. This meant the signal to activate the relay, typically a ground signal from the body control module or the ECU itself, was missing. But why? If the ECU was dead, it couldn't send the signal. But if the relay wasn't switching, the ECU wasn't getting power, so it couldn't respond anyway. It was a classic chicken and egg situation. I traced the wire that carried the activation signal back into the main wiring harness. This was where things got tricky. Modern wiring harnesses are incredibly complex. Bundles of hundreds of wires, all neatly taped together, running through convoluted paths behind the dashboard, under the carpets, and into various control modules. I started carefully unwrapping the harness. Following the specific wire I was interested in, my eyes peeled for any anomalies. After about an hour of careful work, my fingers covered in dust and adhesive residue from the old wiring tape, I found it. It wasn't a cut wire, not a burnt section. It was far more subtle, far more insidious. The wire that supplied the ground signal to the main power relay. The wire that was supposed to tell the relay to click on and send power to the ECU had been carefully, almost surgically, disconnected from its terminal inside a multi-pin connector. It wasn't broken. It had been expertly removed, and then the connector had been reassembled, making it look completely undisturbed. My breath hitched. This wasn't incompetence. This was deliberate. Someone had intentionally disabled the primary power supply to the car's brain. It was a masterful piece of sabotage, designed to be almost impossible to find without an intimate knowledge of the wiring diagrams and a painstaking systematic approach. A quick visual inspection, even a basic fuse check, would never reveal this. It would simply look like a completely dead car. Stone's diagnosis of a completely fried CAN bus and unresponsive modules was a perfect cover story. If the ECU wasn't getting power, of course it wouldn't communicate, and of course all the other modules that relied on the ECU for communication would appear unresponsive. A cold anger began to simmer within me. This wasn't just about a car anymore. This was about professional integrity, about trust, and about a blatant attempt to defraud a customer, and, quite possibly, to undermine a competitor. Stone hadn't just declared the car unfixable. He had made it unfixable, at least to anyone who wasn't willing to dive into the deepest, most intricate parts of the car's electrical system. I took a picture of the disconnected wire, a clear, high-resolution shot. This would be crucial evidence. Then, with a pair of fine-nosed pliers, I carefully reinserted the terminal back into its proper slot in the connector. It clicked into place with a satisfying firmness. I taped the harness back up, making sure everything was secure and protected. I walked back to the driver's seat, my heart pounding with anticipation. This was the moment of truth. I pressed the start button. This time the dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. The infotainment screen flickered to life, displaying the manufacturer's logo. The fuel pump whirred softly. All the warning lights illuminated briefly, then extinguished as they should, indicating the car was performing its pre-start self-check. I felt a surge of triumph, a quiet cheer erupting in my chest. I pressed the start button again, firmly. The engine cranked, a deep, powerful sound, and then, with a glorious, guttural rumble, it burst into life. The exhaust note filled my small shop, a symphony of finely tuned machinery. I let it idle for a moment, listening, feeling the vibrations through the seat. It sounded absolutely perfect. No misfires, no strange noises, just the smooth, powerful thrum of a high-performance engine. I checked the dashboard. No warning lights. The oil pressure was good, the temperature gauge slowly climbing. The car, which had been declared a write-off, a pile of scrap, was now purring contentedly. The satisfaction was immense, not just because I'd fixed a car, but because I'd uncovered a deliberate act of deception. This wasn't just a repair, it was an exposé, but my work wasn't done. Just getting it to start was only the first step. I needed to perform a full diagnostic, a complete system check, to ensure there were no other hidden issues, no other little surprises Stone might have left behind. After all, if he was willing to disable a critical power wire, what else might he have done? I connected my scanner again, this time with the engine running. It connected instantly, pulling up a wealth of data. I ran a full system scan, checking every single control module for fault codes. My eyes scanned the results, looking for anything out of place. To my immense relief, the initial scan came back clean. No active fault codes, no pending codes. This was a good sign. It meant the immediate power issue was indeed the primary problem. However, I wasn't going to take any chances. I wanted to see if Stone had perhaps cleared all the codes before returning the car, hoping to mask any lingering issues or his own diagnostic failures. I dove deeper into the scanner's functions, looking at freeze-frame data and historical fault logs. Some modules retained a history of codes even after they were cleared, especially if the underlying problem hadn't been resolved. As I scrolled through the historical data, I found a few intermittent communication errors in some of the less critical modules, like the passenger seat memory module and the rear parking assist. These were minor, not enough to disable the car, and could have been caused by the main power loss. But then I found something more concerning. A consistent history of low-voltage faults across several modules, almost certainly related to the period when the main power wire was disconnected. These weren't active faults now, but they confirmed the car had been operating under extremely compromised electrical conditions, or more accurately, not operating at all for an extended period. This validated my findings and further condemned Stone's actions. I decided to take the car for a short test drive. I wanted to feel how it handled, listen for any strange noises, and put the engine and transmission through their paces. I backed it out of the shop, the powerful engine sounding even better in the open air. As I drove, the car felt tight, responsive, and utterly capable. The M division had engineered a masterpiece, and now, with the primary electrical systems restored to health, it sang. The engine, a high-revving inline-six, pulled with an eagerness that belied its displacement. Each gear changed from the dual-clutch transmission, a lightning-fast, seamless transition. There was a satisfying thud as the gears engaged, a mechanical precision that spoke volumes about the car's pedigree. I pushed it gently at first, feeling out the steering, which was direct and offered excellent feedback. The suspension, firm but not harsh, absorbed road imperfections with a sophisticated dampening. This was a car that encouraged confidence, a machine built for performance. I took it onto a stretch of road I knew well, a quiet industrial park loop with a few sweeping turns and a short straight. Here, I could safely test its limits a little further. I accelerated hard, feeling the G-forces press me into the leather seat. The engine note rose from a purposeful growl to a magnificent high-pitched wail, a mechanical symphony that resonated through the cabin and directly into my chest. The world outside blurred, the industrial park buildings becoming streaks of concrete and glass. Each shift point was met with an immediate surge of power, the car lunging forward with an almost violent enthusiasm. The speedometer needle swept across the dial with alarming speed, a testament to the M Division's relentless pursuit of velocity. This was not just fast, it was effortlessly, relentlessly fast. As the straight ran out, I braked firmly but progressively, the massive M compound brakes biting hard, hauling the car down from speed with incredible composure. There was no dive, no squirm, just a powerful, linear deceleration that inspired absolute confidence. I flicked the paddle for a downshift, the engine blipping perfectly to match revs, the exhaust emitting a satisfying bark. Turning into the first sweeping bend, the steering wheel felt alive in my hands, communicating every nuance of the road surface, every degree of grip the Michelin Pilot Sports were finding. The car settled into the corner with a perfect balance, the chassis remaining flat and composed, resisting body roll with an almost supernatural defiance. I could feel the limits approaching, a subtle trembling through the wheel, a slight lightening of the rear, but it was all incredibly progressive, easily managed. A gentle squeeze of the throttle on the exit, and the car rocketed out of the turn, the limited slip differential, ensuring every ounce of power was translated into forward motion without drama. I completed another lap, pushing a little harder each time, exploring the boundaries of its capability. The car responded with an eagerness that felt almost sentient. It egged me on, daring me to go faster, to brake later, to turn in sharper. The precision was intoxicating. It wasn't just a collection of parts, it was a cohesive, perfectly tuned instrument. The way the suspension absorbed the undulations of the road, the way the steering weighted up just so in a corner, the sheer, unadulterated grunt of that engine. It was a masterclass in automotive engineering. Every input from my hands and feet was met with an immediate, predictable, and exhilarating reaction. This was the car I remembered, the beast that had been dormant, now fully awake and roaring. A profound sense of satisfaction washed over me, deeper than just the thrill of speed. It was the satisfaction of creation, or rather, recreation. I had brought this machine back from the brink. Days and nights had blurred into a single, focused effort in the garage. The initial despair at the sight of its lifeless systems, the meticulous tracing of wires, the painstaking diagnosis of each fault, the moments of frustration, the small victories of each component restored to functionality. And now, this symphony of power and precision was the direct result of that work. It wasn't just my car. It was our car, in a way. The bond, forged through shared adversity, through the hours spent with wrenches and multimeters, felt stronger than ever. It was a testament to the belief that with enough dedication, even the most complex problems could be unraveled and put right. The industrial park loop, while excellent for initial testing, was beginning to feel restrictive. The car yearned for open spaces, for longer straights and more challenging curves. I decided to take it further, to truly stretch its legs. I eased off the throttle, letting the engine settle into a relaxed hum, the exhaust notes softening to a background purr. The shift into sixth gear was seamless, and the car glided effortlessly, the firm suspension now feeling merely taut, not harsh, a perfect compromise for both performance and cruising. I navigated out of the industrial area, turning onto a B-road that snaked its way through the rolling countryside, a ribbon of asphalt I knew intimately. The landscape opened up, fields of green and gold stretching to the horizon, dotted with ancient trees and the occasional distant farmhouse. The sun, now lower in the sky, cast long shadows, painting the scene in hues of orange and purple. This was where the M3 truly belonged, away from the confines of urbanity, free to express its dual nature. In comfort mode, the steering lightened slightly, the throttle response softened, and the ride became even more compliant. It was still unmistakably an M car, but it was also a perfectly capable grand tourer, devouring miles with effortless grace. The cabin was a sanctuary, the sounds of the road muted, the premium audio system providing a subtle backdrop to the engine's distant thrum. I found myself reflecting on the journey of this car, from its glorious factory beginnings, through its years of faithful service, to its unexpected electrical demise, and finally, its resurrection. Each scratch, each imperfection in the paint, each worn patch on the leather, told a story. They were badges of honor, proof of a life lived. This was not a showroom queen. It was a driver's car, and it reveled in being driven. The feeling of the road beneath me, the subtle vibrations through the steering wheel, the scent of warm oil and burning fuel that occasionally wafted into the cabin, these were the sensory inputs that connected me to the machine, making me an extension of its mechanical heart. As I rounded a long, sweeping bend, a very faint, almost imperceptible flicker caught my eye on the instrument cluster. It was quick, barely a ghost, like a single pixel momentarily changing color before reverting. I blinked, convinced it was just a trick of the light or my imagination, perhaps a reflection. But a few miles later, on another long curve, it happened again. This time, I was looking directly at the cluster. A momentary, almost imperceptible dimming of the background illumination, just for a fraction of a second, on the right side of the main display. It was so subtle, so fleeting, that anyone else would have missed it entirely. But my senses were heightened, tuned to every nuance of this car after weeks of intense focus. I eased off the throttle, my brow furrowing in concentration. It wasn't a warning light, not an error message, just that faint, almost imperceptible hiccup in the illumination. It didn't affect anything else. The engine ran smoothly. The power steering was perfect. All other systems seemed nominal. But it nagged at me. My mind immediately started running through possibilities. A loose connection? A failing capacitor in the cluster itself? An intermittent ground? The electrical system had been the culprit before, and while I had gone over everything meticulously, sometimes the most elusive faults only manifest under specific conditions, when components are warmed up or under slight load variations. I pulled over at a scenic overlook, the car ticking softly as it cooled. The sun was now dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples. I sat for a moment, letting the silence settle, listening to the gentle hum of the car's cooling fans. I tapped the instrument cluster gently, then more firmly, but nothing changed. The illumination remained steady. I turned the ignition off, then on again. All the usual startup checks ran perfectly. No flickering. It was a phantom, an almost non-existent anomaly. Yet, it was enough to plant a seed of doubt, a tiny crack in the perfect facade of its resurrection. This car had always been a project, even when it was running flawlessly. There was always something to tinker with, to improve, to understand. And that was part of its appeal, part of my bond with it. This wasn't a set-it-and-forget-it appliance. It was a living, breathing machine that demanded attention, rewarded dedication. The faint flicker brought back a memory, a conversation I had with an old mentor, a grizzled veteran mechanic who had taught me the ropes when I was just starting out. He always used to say, "The car will tell you its secrets if you just listen closely enough. Sometimes the secrets are whispered, sometimes they are shouted, but they are always there." He had a knack for finding the most obscure faults, simply by observing the most minute details, the ones everyone else dismissed as normal. He had once spent a week chasing an intermittent misfire in a classic Porsche, a fault that only occurred on cold mornings, after exactly 7 minutes of driving, and only when the ambient temperature was below 5 degrees Celsius. Everyone else had given up, blaming it on ancient wiring or a temperamental fuel system. But he had persisted, eventually finding a hairline crack in a ceramic insulator on a spark plug that only expanded enough to cause a short under that precise combination of temperature and vibration. It was an extreme example, but it illustrated his philosophy: never dismiss the whispers. The flicker, however insignificant, was a whisper. It meant there was still something, however small, that wasn't quite perfect. It wasn't a deal-breaker, not a sign of impending doom. But it was a challenge, a tiny puzzle piece missing from the complete picture. My mind, already wired for problem-solving, began to sift through the electrical diagrams I had memorized during the repair. The instrument cluster's power supply was complex, drawing from multiple sources, regulated by various modules. Could it be a transient voltage drop? A failing ground somewhere upstream? A subtle fault in the control unit itself? I knew I couldn't diagnose it fully out here, in the fading light, but the drive had taken on a new purpose. The initial exuberance of pure performance had given way to a more focused, analytical approach. The car was still phenomenal, still a joy to drive, but now there was a subtle undercurrent of investigation. I decided to head towards a more remote section of the road, a winding stretch that led through a dense forest, where the light would be even lower, allowing me to observe the cluster more clearly if the flicker returned. It was a beautiful drive, regardless, and the car's dynamic capabilities would still be put to good use. The road narrowed as I entered the tree line, the canopy overhead forming a dark tunnel. The car's headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the asphalt ahead. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Here, the M3 felt even more alive, darting through the curves with an agility that belied its size. The engine's growl echoed off the trees, a primal sound in the quiet forest. I kept my eyes intermittently on the road and on the instrument cluster, waiting, watching for that ghost of a flicker. The car was performing flawlessly, its power delivery smooth, its handling precise. It was almost as if it was taunting me, daring me to find the flaw. The silence of the forest, broken only by the engine and the rush of air, allowed my thoughts to wander further. This car wasn't just a passion, it was a reflection of me. My tenacity, my attention to detail, my refusal to give up on something I believed in. When I first acquired it, it was already a testament to performance, a symbol of engineering excellence. But through the process of restoring it, it had become something more personal. It was a canvas for my mechanical artistry, a testament to my skill. This flicker, this tiny imperfection, was not a setback, but an invitation. An invitation to dive deeper, to understand it even more intimately, to achieve a level of perfection that few others would bother to pursue. I thought about the countless hours spent poring over service manuals, the grease under my fingernails, the late-night coffee fueling my determination. Each bolt tightened, each wire crimped, each sensor replaced had been a step towards this moment, this drive. And now, the car was whispering a new secret, a new challenge. It was a dialogue between man and machine, a continuous process of discovery and refinement. This was the essence of true automotive passion, not just admiring a finished product, but understanding its very soul, its inherent complexities, and embracing the journey of maintenance and improvement. The winding road eventually straightened out, leading me back towards the outskirts of civilization. The forest gave way to scattered houses, then streetlights began to